Hello and greetings from Australia. My name is Fiona Campbell and I am a phenomenologist living in the Blue Mountains west of Sydney, and I'm coming to you from Darug country. So before I give you the presentation, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and who are the custodians of the land, past, present and future. With my colleague Neil Anderson, we are going to talk about Goethean science, or as we're calling it, Goethean phenomenology, in a socio-cultural context, but especially in relation to climate change in Australia. I am going to provide some local context and talk about the nature of phenomenology, and then Neil is going to provide a more academic context. So I'm now going to start the slides. And I hope you enjoy our presentation. So Australia is one of the countries most vulnerable to climate change. There are projections of longer droughts punctuated by increasingly horrendous floods. Many unique species are in danger of becoming extinct. And then there are the catastrophic bushfires. And all these are probably a result of increasingly extreme climatic conditions here. Our current solutions are not working, and we believe it is more than a problem for just the scientists and politicians, it's one for all of us. So our question is, could Goethean phenomenology provide a cultural shift in the way we see and respond to climate change? One that is very different to our current way. Let me elaborate. Here we see a photo of a koala, an animal iconic of Australia and one I'm sure you're all familiar with. This photo appeared in media late in 2019. Little koala, a native marsupial, lapping water from a puddle in the road. And round the world came the comments on social media, "Oh my God, how cute, how adorable, her little pink tongue," etc. But this in fact signalled to experts something very wrong, because this is not normal natural behaviour in the koalas to drink from the come down to the road. But the photo did not attract attention because of the behaviour, but because of the koala's perceived cuteness. I'm sure if it had been a snake, it really would not have attracted quite the same attention. And this is the problem. Seeing nature in terms of how it meets our conceptions of attractiveness or usefulness to us. So furry animals are cute, but it's really like seeing nature in a way as entertainment, as being there or as being there for our leisure, to relax, to get in tune with ourselves, for our amusement perhaps, to spend time on YouTube, enhancing a dull work day by looking at videos of cute animals and birds, often taken out of their natural environment. And we tend to interpret their behaviour to fit our own emotional needs. There's one video entitled, "Super Cute Koala is Wanting Kisses and Cuddles." And it's a video of a family watching a koala approaching their backyard swimming pool for a drink of chlorinated water. And one of the comments underneath was, "Oh, watching this made me feel so good." So seeing the koala approaching humans and indulging what was described as cute behaviour was therapeutic for the viewer. But this is a therapeutic that has nothing to do with the wild animal and its needs and its environment, or its distress at having to approach humans in a foreign environment. But there has been a shift. In late spring of 2019, the eastern part of Australia was entering a season of catastrophic fires, as I said, and gradually images like this became a global symbol of the environmental grief and fear we were experiencing. And this brings us to another way of looking at nature. That summer was one of months of catastrophic fires. Ever-present danger up and down the coast. 80% of my area, which is a World Heritage area, was burned. An estimated 3 billion mammals, birds, reptiles were killed and displaced during this time. We've always had fires, but this was unprecedented. The sheer scale of loss of wildlife and habitat, but also to humans, was enormous. It was just unimaginable. That summer, we were on high alert, checking our emergency warning app several times a day, struggling with smoke, cut off by flooding or by fire, or people even in the cities being affected by storms of golf ball-sized hailstones. And we saw this increasing fear of nature, personifying it as an enemy. I started seeing more and more news media referring to the fires as an enemy to be combated and defeated. There's even a film called Bushfire Wars, framed as a kind of soap opera, a reality TV show, where you see, dedicated firefighters waging a relentless battle against a completely unpredictable enemy. And we see this same frame of reference being used for anything outside the man-made world that threatens human dominance or control. So what we're seeing here is a dissociated relationship to nature, a separation of human from world, from environment, one that an analytical, rational science view of the world has brought us, one that causes us to view the world on our own terms, a one-sided, dissociated way. Without a proper connection to the world, nature can become something seen as only there for our entertainment, if it's non-threatening, or as an enemy when it becomes a danger to us. When we try to analyse the world and step back from it, we separate ourselves from it. This is what produces what could be called theories of ungroundable facts of science. They are literally not grounded in the world we experience and we observe. They're grounded in an abstracted, conceptual world. So how can it be different? In Goethean science, unlike in theory building methodologies, the aim is rather to step towards the world, to engage as directly as possible with it, rather than stepping back from it. When we step closer to the world, we can become, as Goethe says, at home with it. Through a process of repeated observations, we can immerse ourselves in the phenomenon of the other in order to understand, to reveal its essential being. And then we learn to see nature as a whole, but with great multiplicity in its unity. As I said, Goethean science was originally directed towards science rather than psychology, but it emphasises immersion of ourselves into a world through a direct experiential contact, through observation. But it's not an ordinary everyday observation. Goethe used the term beholding, meaning to contemplate receptively, a kind of seeing of the mind that can reveal the beingness of the other. It is an unfolding observational process, one that aims at understanding, not explanation, and can lead us to have new eyes for the world. So Goethean phenomenology orientates to the study of nature rather than humans, but it in fact closes to the gap between these two fields, because its approach to observation is also a path to self-discovery in ourselves. And as a path of self-discovery, it provides a more enlightening understanding of the world and of how to capture our experiences of it more directly. To do this, one must go back upstream, as Henry Bortoff calls it, back into the experiencing of the experience. In this way, seeing can become a coming into being experience that intensifies the experience for us and unites us briefly with it. The phenomenon is then experienced as a dynamic unfolding event, not something that is already past and predetermined as we try to conceptualize it. Then we can learn to see nature as an integrated whole and our place within it. So let's return now to the koala. What was unsettling for experts and keen observers of koalas when seeing them lapping water off the road or approaching swimming pools is that Koalas just don't normally get this water this way. They don't leave their trees to drink. It was in fact thought for a very long time that they got their moisture from chewing gum leaves. It was in fact only last year discovered that koalas take their water from the trees, from the moisture on the surface of the tree. Just as we see the koala here lapping, who's got a tongue on the tree, that is how they get their moisture. And this discovery came from repeated, long, careful observations. Yet the scientists and koala experts who knew the species well were unlikely to have realised just how important this approach is. The koala's natural habitat is the tree. So they use it for their main needs, sleeping, meeting, feeding, and also for their water. So to take the koala away from the tree's world and to put it in ours takes away what you might say the essential beingness of the koala and distorts our true understanding of its place in the world. So we need to develop a different response to nature, other than one that always sees the animal and separate from the world and ourselves separate from it, and learn to see her in her manifold diversity. Only then will we learn to understand how to read her script and how to work with her. So the title of this conference is Breathing with the Climate Crisis. And this can be approached through Goethean phenomenology. By stepping towards the world to be at home with it, we breathe out into the world and unite ourselves with it. When stepping back again into ourselves, we breathe into ourselves and then observe how we have changed our relationship to the world. In this way, nature is no longer the enemy or something that exists only on our own terms, but something that we can breathe with. We can breathe into nature and so find a different way to become at home with the world. How can we do this? In Australia, Indigenous people believe in treading softly on the land because they are the custodians, the original custodians of the country. And to them, the catastrophic bushfires are indicative of not taking care of country. But for us who came later to this ancient land, who have not inherited this soul disposition, this way of seeing the world is foreign. For us, the way to think about nature's and her needs, it really requires a way in the way we see the land and the way we think about it. And a Goethean approach can help us change our thinking. So Rudolf Steiner tells us, as long as a person does not feel the working and creating of an idea, his thinking remains separate from nature. But to experience, to feel the working and creating of an idea, our thinking must be sufficiently fluid and dynamic that we can experience and feel the way an idea comes into being. Theodor Schwenk, the water scientist, described thinking as being like natural water flow in his book, Sensitive Chaos. So instead of seeing thinking as being a set of problem-solving steps, we need to change our way of thinking by changing our way of seeing the world, from seeing thinking as one string of fixed concepts to one where thinking is experienced as a continual stream of flow and resistance, out of which new ideas arise. Then thinking can become a dynamic experience with the capacity to revise and disrupt, dissolve and reform those underlying fixed concepts that tend to govern our habitual way of thinking. And then we not only experience our thinking process in connection with the dynamic living world around us, but it means we are open and cognizant to what the world is speaking to us. And phenomenology can do this for us. To lead into Neil's presentation, I would now like to draw your attention to how Goethean phenomenology can then act as a cultural therapeutic for us. So the psychologist Brent Dean Robbins has said, it is a therapeutic process Goethean phenomenology because it is one that may potentially restore to health and wholeness those who practice it. It is a cultural therapeutic because if it is taken up as a cultural practice and then as a cultural worldview, it may in fact be curative and restorative for our entire culture. So he goes on to say that the aim of a cultural therapeutic is that we own up to our obligations. It is a matter of making explicit those responses to the world that are covered up or concealed by layers of culture, but which nevertheless continue to call us and which remain accessible only through careful, critically engaged description of the phenomena. The process of owning up to our obligations is one that can be a healing process, a process of coming home to ourselves. Hence it is therapeutic. So this is not an approach that says being in nature is good for me just because of how it makes me feel better, but one where we learn to perceive the beingness of nature that opens us to the wonder and interconnectedness of it. It is therapeutic because it is potentially transformative of us and therefore our relationship to the world. Goethean phenomenology closes the gap between natural science and the human sciences, since both come to share the task of schooling our faculties of observation and cultivating wisdom. And when they become united, because observation is always a process of self-discovery, then we may realise through this process of self-discovery more sustainable practices of how we live with nature and with each other. Thank you. So now we'll go on to Neil's presentation on Goethean phenomenology and climate change.
Anderson, and last year in 2020, I organised a conference at Sydney University on phenomenology and climate change. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the Taragu and Gundagara people of the lands I'm speaking to you today. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which each of you are living and working from today. As we share our knowledge of teaching and learning, may we also pay respect to our elders, both past and present, as it is in their knowledge and experiences that holds the key to the success of future generations. Climate change. It's been about 30 years since Australian scientists first warned about the effects of climate change. To be precise, it was on November the 30th, 1987, at the annual Greenhouse Conference at Monash University, where 240 delegates gathered and correctly anticipated the physical and social impacts of global warming. Yet in Australia since then, such scientific advice has largely been ignored. I do not wish to address this question, but rather a wider one. Is climate change the symptom of a larger crisis in world culture? Dorothy Green was a literary critic, academic, and peace activist. Part of her education was at Sydney University under the Professor of Philosophy, John Anderson, who taught her that an unexamined life was not worth living, and the basis of culture was criticism. She was also appreciative of the writings of Theodore Adorno regarding Anderson's Socratic dialect as having a great deal in common with the critical theory developed by the Frankfurt School. She read widely with an appreciative ear across the humanities and played a major role in the academic recognition of Australian literature and was fearless in her criticism. Although climate change was not one of her primary concerns, rather imminent nuclear war, she did champion the writings of biologist and novelist Grant Watson, regarding him as one of the imaginative and perceptive writers to visit Australia. So I'd like to begin with her because I feel that she showed a sensibility which we need still. Grant Watson was a biologist, but also a novelist, and he was influenced by the ideas of Jung and also Steiner. And we could regard him as a proto-phenomenologist The sensitive approach to the Australian landscape and its first peoples allowed them to reveal themselves to him. Green was drawn to Watson and others like him because she saw that they recognized humanity's mental health and humanity depended on a sacramental and symbolic relationship to the natural world, seeing the human being as part of the web of being. Her critical sense rebelled against a civilization willingly and knowingly destroying its habitat. She was also sensitive to Watson's idea of history as the incarnation of the Logos, which was quite contrary to the accepted ideologies of the time as it is. Now, since Dorothy Green, the phenomenology has emerged as a way of offering means and ways to uncover the limitations of the Enlightenment in modern civilization. And an increasingly important figure in phenomenology is Goethe. Now, Friedrich Armin is a German scholar at the University of Michigan, and also quite a leading scholar on Goethe. And he has this very rather interesting take on the climate crisis. He describes that ecology is a practical discipline, the practical dilemmas of the ecological movement, and arguably of the environmental crisis itself, are the consequences of our failure to comprehend the complexity and unity of nature theoretically. He says that the ecological crisis is first and foremost an epistemological crisis. I am inclined to agree with him, and I want to explore what he might mean by this final. So why is the ecological crisis first and foremost an epistemological crisis? Well, the development of modern science was a watershed moment in the evolution of knowledge. Simply put, the otherworldliness of medieval Christianity, which drew on Neoplatonism to mistrust the senses and seek the reality beyond it, was largely replaced in terms of influence by a materialistic scientific worldview, which continued to mistrust the senses and posited determination by a world of subsensory forces. So we went from one kind of imbalance to another. Hence, climate change is understood as a material problem to be remedied by material. However, both Goethe and Steiner, on the other hand, although very strongly in a Western tradition, are keen to trust the senses and are wary of a Platonist or materialist otherworldliness, and instead find common ground with Aristotle's endeavor to seek spirit in matter. So how then would the phenomenological Steiner or Goethe approach the climate crisis? Well, Goethe is unique in the Romantic movement, also in world history, in not only being a poet but also being a scientist, and bringing an artist's sensibility to the sciences. So the physicist Henry Partof describes Goethe's approach as, instead of a movement from mental abstraction from the particular to the general, there is a perception of the universal shining in the particular. In other words, the particular becomes symbolic of the universal. Goethe's description of the primal phenomenon as an instance worth 1,000, bearing all in itself, has to be understood in terms of this relationship between the universal and the particular. Now, Steiner, like Armin, also wished to bring Goethe's scientific work to a larger audience, and we can see this influence appearing in this much loved series of lectures, lecture that Steiner gave, Practical Training in Thought. Now, although this lecture appears to be largely a series of exercises, it also illustrates a wholly new way of being in the world and builds upon a philosophic foundation substantiated by the listener or reader's own personal experience if they undertake to do the exercises consistent. Implicit in Steiner's presentation is his earlier work, The Philosophy of Freedom, where he describes the world as a unity and how it is the nature of our consciousness to divide that unity into inner thoughts and outer perceptions, and how the strivings of art, science, and religion seek to give us back that unity. In Practical Training in Thought, Steiner appeals to a general audience, avoids philosophic terminology, yet draws on the same Aristotelian metaphysical foundation. The belief that the world has been created by thought and is still ceaselessly being created in this manner is the belief that can alone fructify the actual inner practice of thought. So, man-made objects to thoughts of nature. Beginning with phenomenological exercises in consciousness, such as Goethean observation, Steiner sketches a pathway to growing together with things, coming to feel as if our own thinking occurred within the things themselves. It is much easier to do this with the thought structure of man-made objects. For instance, by considering the different types of pencils, we can gradually arrive at the idea of a pencil, a leap of imagination in the inventor. To arrive at the idea of the plant, as Goethe did, is, as Steiner reminds us, not so easily done. However, that is the task that he sets before it.
So what ails the spirit of nature? To wrap this up, is the ecological crisis an epistemological crisis? And without undertaking the phenomenological practice of Steiner and Goethe, how can we address climate change? Thank you for listening.